Continuamos y tengo el agrado ahora de presentarles a una persona que es director de SU Labs en el programa de Startups, precisamente de Singularity University, donde se incuban emprendimientos basados en tecnologías exponenciales. Se inició en Internet antes de que existiera el primer navegador web, fundó algunas startups tecnológicas, lideró Platform Solutions Group de eBay en Europa, lanzó una empresa de consultoría para asesorar a emprendedores y fundadores de startups en estrategias y operaciones. Ha invertido en startups tecnológicas de etapa temprano y ha liderado el laboratorio de innovación de Mozilla. También creó WebFWD, el programa de aceleración de Mozilla, dirigió la oficina de la presidencia de Mozilla y ha invertido en organizaciones de impacto social en todo el mundo para Google.org. Es fundador de Mentor for Good Power Up y de Coaching Fellowship. Escribe artículos frecuentemente sobre la magia que ocurre en la intersección entre el emprendimiento, la tecnología y el impacto global, así como dicta conferencias. Así que tenemos el agrado de contar esta tarde con Pascal Finitte. Un aplauso para él.
I hope it was good. It's an incredible honor to be here. This is only my second time in Peru, and this is just an absolutely amazing event. What I want to talk to you today about is what we're seeing in Silicon Valley in terms of entrepreneurship, and specifically about what we're seeing in terms of exponential entrepreneurship. You heard a little bit about me. That is me. So I had the great fortune and pleasure of seeing the entrepreneurial ecosystem, seeing startups from all kind of different angles. So I started my own companies. I worked at some of the more interesting tech companies in their early days. I co-founded a venture capital firm. I did merger and acquisition. So in a lot of ways, I was very lucky to be at the right place at the right time. And really, my life centers around these three circles. So my life it started out with a passion for entrepreneurship and technology. So I grew up with, my dad bought me my very first computer when I was like 7 years old. So I got into computers fairly early on. And increasingly, I'm interested in the idea of like, how do we leverage technology on entrepreneurship to solve the world's biggest problem, namely impact. Coincidentally, this is also the mission of the place I work at. So Singularity University has this wonderful mission to inspire, educate, and empower leaders to apply exponential technology to tackle humanity's grand challenges. So this is what we're doing, and this is what I want to talk to you about today. Before we get there, I have a question for you. Who in this audience considers themselves an entrepreneur? Who is an entrepreneur? Who has started a company? Can you stand up? Just stand up for a second. I know it's afternoon. I know. It's hard. Fantastic. So please stand. So who is in an entrepreneurial fashion in a company? Please stand up. So everyone who thinks you're working in a company as an entrepreneur. Okay, so if everyone else please stands up. Just everyone stand up for a second. So here's the thing you need to understand. You are all entrepreneurs. If you like it or not, if you like the moniker or not, you are all entrepreneurs because you're all going to change the world, and I'm going to spill the beans on how this works. So let's go on a little journey. So it starts out with this here. So at Singularity University, and you have seen lots and lots of talks today about this, we're talking about these exponential trends. So we're talking about technology being on this like accelerated adaptation curve. And again, you've seen lots of examples for this. And the classic example is always Moore's Law. Moore's Law stipulates that computer chips get twice as fast every 18 to 24 months. So every 2 years, a computer is twice as fast, roughly. And this has been true for the last 50 years. So there's a really interesting piece in this curve, which is what we call the linear exponential deception. And what I'm going to explain to you in 1 second is that as humans, you're really not well equipped to fundamentally understand exponential trends. So here's the example. Imagine you take 30 linear steps, 30 steps, one after the other. You have a really good sense how far you get. So if you're growing up, like I grew up in Germany, where you have the metric system, this is 30 meters. For the people who grew up in the US, this is about 30 yards. So you have to get a really good sense how far this is. For me, it's probably from here, from the stage, towards the back end of the room. Now imagine, for 1 second, you take 30 exponential steps. So imagine every step is twice as far as the step before. So you go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, 16. So you do 30 of those. Without doing the math in your head, which I'm sure you can, what do you think, how far do you get? Just throw a number at me. 30 exponential steps, how far do you get? What's the first number which comes to your head? China? That's very good. So from here to China. So when I do this experiment, typically people tell me something like 1,000 meters, or 1 mile, 1 kilometer. The really adventurous tell me like you get to China. Now in reality, this is 1 billion meters. 1 billion meters gets you 25 times around the planet. This is the challenge we have with linear exponential thinking. This is what we're teaching at Singularity University and what this technology is all about. So we talked about like how this looks like in terms of like you've got these exponential trends and your thinking is linearly. Now there's some interesting pieces in this curve. There's a piece in the curve which is there where you expect technology to be here. In reality, it's here because exponential trends always start out very, very slow. So this piece in the curve we call disappointment. And the example I can give you is Google Glass. I don't know if you had any experience, if you ever seen it. Google Glass is a classic piece of technology where we are disappointed because the technology isn't quite there yet, the battery life isn't great, the functionality isn't amazing, it costs you $1,500, and when you wear it, you look a little bit like a dork. Then something interesting happens. Technology gets better over time, and you come to this crossover point. The crossover point is when Steve Jobs gets on stage and shows you the iPhone for the very first time, when you realize that this is how phones have to look like in the future. And then you come into this world of chaos and amazement. This is when your linear brain can't even keep up with all the changes we are seeing in the world. So we are seeing this not only happening in technology per se, but we're seeing it in entrepreneurship. And what we're seeing here is that the future is not incremental anymore. The future moves really, really quickly. And that's an incredible opportunity for everyone and anyone who wants to start a company or who is an entrepreneur in a company, or, as we just discovered, everyone in this room. This is a show which airs currently in the US on a channel called HBO. This show is called Silicon Valley, and it's kind of like a caricature of what's going on in Silicon Valley. But there's an interesting piece in Silicon Valley, an interesting thing which happens here, which is, you might have heard of this. There's this thing called the unicorns. So in Silicon Valley, we now have companies which are valued, private companies which are valued at $1 billion and more. That's a lot of money for a company. So we have these things which we call unicorns because they're rare. But they're not quite as rare because we now have 107 of those. There's 107 companies in Silicon Valley right now which are valued at $1 billion and more. What's fascinating about this is that a good fourth of them, 25% of them, are less than 4 years old. So there's something happening in entrepreneurship which makes these companies get quicker and quicker and quicker to bigger and bigger and bigger markets. Anyone ever used an Uber or heard of it? Okay. So Uber is a really interesting company. So Uber is a company which is now valued at $41.6 billion. $41.6 billion. They're rumored to do another financing round which values them at $50 billion. But even at $41.6 billion, if you compare that valuation to the S&P 500, the 500 most valuable companies in the US, Uber is worth more than 80% of them. Uber today is in the top 20% of S&P companies. Now you can argue if that makes sense. So Uber is, for example, worth more than Delta Airlines. You can argue if that makes sense, but Uber is an incredibly disruptive force. And there's something happening in entrepreneurship, which I spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of years trying to decipher. And what I came up with is these 10 lessons for entrepreneurs. And understand you're all entrepreneurs. This is not just for people who are starting companies. This is stuff you can take into any which direction. You can take this into your companies. You can take this into your families, into your homes, into your schools. Anything you want to do as an entrepreneurial activity, here are a couple of lessons for you. This is, I believe, is at the essence of where these companies come from. First of all, they use technology. But here's the thing which are really interesting. Here's lesson number one. Whatever you do, regardless, it has to be better. Not just marginally better, it has to be significantly better than the status quo. The iPhone is such a success because it was 10 times better than whatever anyone else was doing. There's a counter-argument to this, which is mediocrity is just exhausting and boring. We are surrounded in a world of mediocre products. This is a picture I took at a supermarket in Silicon Valley. This is the aisle which sells you beans, black beans. There is no differentiator between black beans. It's like there's like 40 companies making black beans, but none of them are superior. None of them are better. None of them actually entice me to buy them. This is boring and exhausting. It exhausts me. What was that? Same for the politicians? That is your comment, not mine. What's really important is that you build superior products. When I tell you a story, this is an Apple store. If you ever have been in an Apple store, there's something really interesting happening in an Apple store. Apple stores have a very little product per square foot. When you go in there, they're very empty. They're really beautifully designed, but in a sense of like product per square foot, they're really empty. Apple stores are the highest grossing stores in the US per square foot. They sell more than any other store, despite the fact that they have so little product in there. What Apple did was they took products and they think about how do you make a product which is superior. Obviously, they're doing this with their computer products, but they're also doing it with the way they approach the store. When you go in an Apple store and you look at a laptop, the screen of the laptop is at an odd angle, which forces you to touch the screen. When you want to if you want to play with the laptop, you have to take the screen and bend it forward. The reason for that is because Apple wants you to touch the product, because they know that once you touch the product, you have a much more intimate relationship with the product. Plus, the product's made out of this wonderful aluminum, so you're actually enticed by the product. So contrast this with Best Buy. Best Buy is a big electronics store. They're doing okay, not that great anymore. In their employee handbook, they write that the screens have to stand at the perfect angle for the customer so the customer doesn't touch the screen because it puts stains on the screen. That's the difference in how you think about your experiences. You build superior products. If you think about it, every product which has dominated the world, including Uber, but also Wikipedia. Wikipedia destroyed Encyclopedia Britannica. They're always superior products, and not just by a margin, but by a large amount. There's an interesting piece in there, which is it's actually easier for you to think about making something 10 times as good than making it 10% better. Making something 10% better is really hard because what you need to do is you need to think inside of your little box and optimize the box. Optimizing the box is really hard because everyone is doing it all the time. But thinking about 10 times better allows you to think completely differently. You suddenly think about like things which you have never thought would be possible because you have to force yourself. If you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, which probably dates me, in Fight Club, there's a couple of rules. There's rule number 1 and rule number 2, and they're identical. And in Fight Club, they're saying that you shouldn't talk about Fight Club. This rule is so important that this is your first and your second rule. For every one of my rules here, every one of my like, little insights, I have a book recommendation. This is a wonderful book written by Ed Catmull, who's the co-founder of Pixar. It's called Creativity, Inc., where he talks about how do you build a superior product. And Pixar is interesting because Pixar as a company is the only movie studio ever, who has released every single movie they released was a top grossing hit, #1 hit. They released something like 11, 12 movies now. Every single one of them top grossing. It's really hard to do in the film industry. So clearly they have come to an interesting position. So that's your first one. Let's go onwards. Here's our second one. Whatever you do, you have to be faster. This is very true for startups. Because when you're a startup, the one thing you have, the only thing you have, is speed. It literally is your main advantage. You don't have the money, you don't have the distribution channels, you don't have the marketing power, you don't have the people as your big opponents, but you have speed. By the time it takes a big company to even think about building a product, you have released version 1. Even if you look at innovative companies such as Google, where I was, it takes Google 3 months to like even think about doing something, like get the right people into the meeting room and then like find the right times, book the meeting room. By that time, as a startup, you have already released version number 2. So speed is of absolute crucial importance to you. There's a book called The Mythical Man Month. This was written in the 60s and 70s, which talks about how IBM released a computer, the IBM AS360, big computer. And in typical big company fashion, the computer was over budget and over time. So what did they do? Very simple. They did what every big company does. They threw more people at it. So it just increased like the engineering force. What happened? It got even slower. So the guy who was running this was fascinated by it because it doesn't make sense. He was like, why does it get slower when I put more people on it? So he started studying it, and he wrote this book. And this book talks about how the challenge is the more people you have, the more intersections and the more coordination you have. And with the more coordination, you slow projects down. So if you're 2 people in a garage, your number 1 advantage is that you don't have meetings. Your number 1 advantage is that you know each other blindly. You don't even talk about stuff. You just make it happen. So to the extent you can, bring this into your companies. Amazon has a rule which they call the 2-pizza rule. The 2-pizza rule is that not a single project team can be bigger than what you can feed with 2 large pizzas. So Amazon teams are never above about 10 to 12 people. Let's come to number 3. Richard Branson. You can think about Richard Branson what you want. The one thing he does is he is an incredibly amazing marketeer. And what you have to do is you need to be louder. You need to shout louder into the market space because you are the underdog. You are the new guy. You are the crazy ones. What you have to do, though, is, and this is hard. This is typically really, really hard for companies. You have to be known for one thing and for one thing only. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Mozilla, the maker of the Firefox web browser, when Google Chrome came out. And the Google Chrome team did something very, very right. If I would ask you today, I'm sure some of you use Chrome. Why do you use Chrome? What is the number 1 answer? What do you think? Why do people use Chrome today? Speed? Fast? Exactly. So here's the irony. When they launched this product, they had a gazillion new features. It was a great product. It was faster, but it had Flash integration, it was crash resilient, it had better tab management, it looked better, yada, yada, yada. A huge laundry list of features. Now every big company typically goes into the market and says, here's all the features, because they're rightfully proud of them. The problem is, as a consumer, you can't comprehend this, and you don't know what they stand for. So what you need to do is you need to figure out what is the one feature my customer cares most about. And it's about the customer, not about you. You take that one feature, and that is the feature you hone in on. When Google Chrome started, every single ad, everything they did, everything they said was about speed. To the extent that they even employed tricks in the software itself to make it look faster. So what Chrome did was when you started the software, it paints the screen before you can actually interact with it. So it looks like you instantly have the browser up. What they realized is it takes you a little while to move the mouse cursor up to the URL field, in which time the browser has finally loaded. Speed. Now the irony is, today, when you look at speed tests, all the browsers are same speed. In a lot of cases, like Firefox, for example, is faster, or even Safari is faster. But still, people use Chrome because of speed, perception. So you have to be known for one thing and one thing only. There's a counter-argument to this, or a secondary argument to this, which is you need to polarize on purpose. If you want to be known for something and you want to have people like be passionate about the thing you're doing, and I would argue that you can only build a company and a product if you have passionate users behind it, then you have to polarize. You need to be okay that some people love you, those are the ones you want, and some people will just hate you. You will have people, when you're Apple, you have people who camp out in front of your stores overnight to wait for the latest release of the iPhone 5 or 6 or whatever it is, and you will have people who mock those people. And you have people who will go around and say, like, this is the dumbest thing on the planet. If you are in the middle, if people are like, meh, then you're not winning. When you look at most phone companies today, they're exactly this. They're just meh. That's the reason why they're all losing. You have to polarize on purpose. There's a wonderful book by a guy called George Lewis. He was one of the original ad men back in the 60s in New York. He wrote a book called Damn Good Advice for People with Talent. If you're susceptible to swear words, if you don't like swearing, do not read this book. It's pretty full of it. Let's take this one step further. You can argue about this guy's politics, but the one thing he did very, very well is rhetorics. And the reason why is when you read, when you see him speak, he's incredibly explicit. He's incredibly sharp and incredibly clean in his language. Let me show you what I see today all the time. This is a real-world example of a conference title. This is not something I made up. And I have to read it. I cannot memorize it. It says, exploratory experiences that then translate visionary knowledge into a strategic plan for capturing future opportunities. I have no idea what that even means. So you're trying to sell me a product which I don't even understand, intellectually don't understand. And I see tons and tons and tons of people doing this. And you know, this makes me feel this way. The solution to that is simple. Whatever you do, express it in 8 words or less. 8 words or less in the following structure. Verb, target, outcome. 8 words or less, verb, target, outcome. Let me explain. This is one of our companies. They have a vaccine monitor device. It's a connected device which monitors vaccine fridges in Africa. Their mission statement is monitor vaccines to prevent spoilage. You get it. You read it, you get it. You're in. This is another one of our companies. They teach kids maker skills, like robotics and 3D printing and all this kind of stuff. Teach kids employable skills. Super simple. Here's another example. This is one of my nonprofits. One of my nonprofits is focused on inspiring young people to become entrepreneurs. Inspire students to become entrepreneurs. As simple as that. But here's the thing. Here's the magic. You actually understand it. And if you can understand it, you can decide if you want to be in or out. And that's what I need to get to do. I need to polarize. I need you to either love what we're doing, or I need you to say, this is not for me, that's fine. Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. And this is the one book I do not recommend you actually buying. Rather, go on TED and watch his TED Talk. It's a 15-minute TED Talk. It's amazing. You can literally spare yourself the money to buy the book. Well, actually, buy the book to support him financially. You don't need to read it. Simon is an amazing, amazing tutor. Coming to our 5th one. What you have to do is you have to stay focused. As an entrepreneur, your number one feature as a person is that you will see opportunity everywhere. When you stand in line waiting for coffee, you have 15 ideas on how to make that line better, how to make better coffee, how to increase the store. Look, that is your entrepreneurial spirit. That's why you are an entrepreneur. The challenge is, if you're not focused, you become like defrazzled. Like, this is what killed my first startup. $2.5 million, killed it. Because I could not focus, because I had too many ideas. A good friend of mine recently, a while ago, said, what you have to do is you need to make the main thing the main thing. Figure out what is the stuff which is really important to your business and focus on that relentlessly. 80-20 rule, like find out what are the 20% which move 80% of my business and focus on that absolutely relentlessly. Guy Kawasaki, a good friend of mine, wrote a book called The Art of the Start. He just recently released it as a 2.0 version, like a new version. It's a phenomenal book for every entrepreneur to read. He talks about this quite a bit. This is my favorite movie, Alice in Wonderland. Probably because Alice, like, when you read the book, it's like full of drug references, probably a reason. But there is something interesting in Alice, which is you have to stay networked. And this sounds easy, like networked, sure, obviously, networked. Everybody's like talking about networking, and we've got the LinkedIns of this world. But there's some underlying magic to networking, and this is what we call the strong versus the weak ties. So here's the magic. We typically network with people who are like us. The people we know, the people we went to school with, the people who do the same work we're doing. Because it's easy. They are like us. They're our strong ties. We already have a relationship with them. Now the challenge is if you go to these people, they see the same opportunities as you do because they read the same papers, they talk to the same people, they think the same. So you're actually not getting any new information. What you need to do is you need to cultivate a network of weak ties. The weak ties are the ones who are doing stuff differently. They're the crazy ones, like your artist friend, or the person who's like always on the edge of technology doing this crazy stuff. Those are the people you want to talk to. There's a gazillion studies which show you that, for example, when you look for a job, and the job comes through your network, the job in most cases comes through your weak ties, not through your strong ties, because the strong ties, again, they see the same thing. So you have to put yourself out there. Seneca the Younger said around the time of the birth of Christ that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. I believe that to be fundamentally true. Luck is something you fabricate. Luck is something you make. And you make it by being ready, but also creating those opportunities. And that's where you want to create your weak ties opportunities. There's a book from Adam Grant called Give and Take. This was released last year. It's probably my favorite book I read all of last year. It's a wonderful book about how you show up in the world as someone who's cultivating a network in a positive way. It's a really, really, really beautiful work. Make note of this plane. We will come back to this story in a second, because here's the important bit about the plane. What you need to do is you need to be smarter. Now you say, like, sure, Pascal, smarter. What does that even mean? It means this. You need to avoid the survivorship bias, and this is the story of the plane. In the Second World War, the US was flying bombers from London, which were from the UK, which were stationed in the UK over Germany. Now, if you fly a bomber, the challenge with a bomber is you fly very low, back in the Second World War, and you fly very slow. So, easy target. The reality of the times was that if you fly one of these planes, your chance of survival after a tour is 50%. You could literally flip a coin if you would die in this plane or not, because you're flying so low and so slow, and the Germans shoot you down. Now, the US didn't like that outcome, very obviously, and decided to do something about it. So what they did is they assembled a team, and they looked at all the planes which came back, and looked at the bullet holes in the planes, and they knew that they needed to reinforce the bottom side of the plane. They couldn't reinforce the whole plane, because then it's a tank, it doesn't fly anymore. So they knew that they needed to find the strategic points in the plane they need to reinforce. So they looked at the planes and looked at where the bullet holes were and were like, great, that's where we need to reinforce them. Luckily, they had a mathematician on their team who said, this is exactly wrong, because what you're doing is you're looking at the survivors. What you need to do is you need to look at the ones which didn't make it. Because the survivors, very obviously, they have holes in their wings and such, but they made it. They're survivors. We don't need to reinforce those. So, long story short, they reinforced the other parts of the plane. The survival rate shot up by 95%. So 95% of flights were actually successful. Why am I telling you this? Very simple. When you read the media today, everything is about survivors. The only media you get today is survivors. The people we celebrate are survivors. The Steve Jobses, the Mark Zuckerbergs, you name it. They're all survivors. They have all great stories. There's a lot to learn from them, no question. But you're missing half of the story. So be smart that you actually educate yourself, that you have to learn from the people who didn't make it, because there's deep learning in it. Oh, by the way, I'm also a survivor. So there's a book by Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford called Hard Facts, Dangerous Half-Truth, and Total Nonsense, which is a wonderful framework on how to think about data and like looking at data from both sides of the medallion. So it's a great, great read. This is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, very famously, when he invented the light bulb, went through like thousands of iterations of that light bulb, which brings us to our 8th lesson. The 8th lesson is you need to be resilient. This is probably the most important skill you need to have as an entrepreneur. It's like you need to be okay with failure, because you will fail over and over and over again. You need to build up resilience. Because the one thing I can guarantee you, failure is inevitable. There's not a way you cannot not fail. And even if you're Steve Jobs, the great Steve Jobs, you fail. This is a company called Next, which Steve Jobs built after he left Apple for the first time. By all means and measures, Next was a total disaster and total failure. But it prepared him to become the Steve Jobs, which then returned to Apple, which made Apple the biggest and most valuable company on the planet. It's inevitable. You will fail. So be better prepared for it. There's a book by Peter Sims called Little Bets. So here's the deal with failure. You want to make sure that your failure is not fatal. You don't want to have a failure situation where you're bankrupt and nothing works anymore. You can actually design failure in what is called little bets. So you break it down into smaller pieces where failure doesn't hurt quite as much. This is a good friend of my family, actually. She's an artist. And the one thing she doesn't do is she doesn't give a damn. And that's what you need to do. You need to be ignorant. For you, there cannot be any rules, as long as you're not crossing the line of the law. Not advocating you should cross the line of the law here. But what you will find is, again and again, people will tell you this is not the way it's going to be done. This doesn't work. This is not the way. You have to ignore these people. But you need to be smart, because there's a couple of rules which are rules of survival. When you go to base camp at Mount Everest and you want to climb up to Mount Everest, you better follow the people who know how to get up there. This is a place where you don't want to break the rules. You have the same in business. There's rules of survival which you want to attach to. But everything else you need to question. This is one of the most pleasurable books I've ever read. It's called Do the Work by a guy called Stephen Pressfield. It's a very quick read. You literally read it in an hour and a half. I gave this book to a friend of mine who was boarding a plane flight from San Francisco to Atlanta, which is a 4-hour flight. By the end of the flight, he calls me and said, I'd read the book on the flight. I just quit my job, and I'm going back to school. That's the power of the book. So if you want to shift things up, great book to read. Let me end with a 10th lesson, and then I'll have a little bit more to tell you. But the 10th lesson is you have to be relaxed. This is a thing which a lot of people get wrong. I see a ton and ton of entrepreneurs who are really into it, and they're really pushing, and that's great, but they forget to be relaxed. Let me tell you the tale of 2 lumberjacks. This is a story which Jeff Hoffman, who's the founder of Priceline.com, told me. And Jeff is a very, very successful entrepreneur. So back in the day, there were 2 lumberjacks. And these 2 lumberjacks were competing against each other. They were hacking lumber, basically, as a competition. So lumber hacking is like you hack down trees, and whoever hacks most trees in a specific period of time wins. So these 2 guys, huge guys, one American, one Canadian, they never competed against each other, but they were the top of the world. So they came to this point where they said, we need to compete against each other. We need to know who is the strongest lumberjack in the country. So they decided to set up a match. 24 hours, lumberjacking, big forest, and they just go up with their axe. And you can imagine, huge guys, right? Like my size, 3 times my weight. So they start. And they start hacking. And they're like literally the same size. So they start hacking. And the one guy is just hacking and hacking and hacking. And the other guy starts hacking, and every 2 hours makes a short break. And the lumberjack who's like hacking the whole time is like, that is stupid. Like, why is he stopping? That doesn't make no sense. So they're hacking. 24 hours later, they measure how much wood they logged. And lo and behold, the guy who took the breaks wins. So the lumberjack who didn't take the breaks is confused. He's like, how does this happen? We work the same time. We have the same strength. I spent the same amount of time hacking as you. Pure mathematics, I should win. So the guy who took the breaks looks at him and says, you know, sometimes you need to break and you need to sharpen the axe. And that's the tale of the two lumberjacks. You have to take breaks and sharpen the axe because otherwise you're just doing stupid work. There's a wonderful book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now, which goes into the metaphysics of that. Let me give you a warning. And I mean, because I give you that warning at the end, I should have given it to you at the beginning. There are no maps. Now, I'm kind of lying, because actually what I just presented to you is a wonderful list of 10 things. That's a map. Well, actually, there are maps. The challenge is they're never yours. You need to contextualize maps. Every time someone tells you like something works that way, very often it means it worked for me in my circumstances, in my situation. Take the learning out of that, but understand that whatever someone presents to you as a map is never your map. It's just information. Here's a bonus. I mentioned to you that there's a gentleman called Guy Kawasaki, very successful entrepreneur, was the first evangelist at Apple, very outspoken guy, fantastic speaker, good friend of mine. And he says, don't let the bozos grind you down. And these are the bozos. Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM, said in 1943, I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. 5 computers. I can bet you, like, I at home have about 5 computers. Western Union said when they saw the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. Bravo. Or you take Ken Olsen. Ken Olsen invented the personal computer system. He said there's no reason why anyone would want a computer in their home. Those are the bozos. You need to be careful because these people are out there, and these people are typically very convincing. You need to be very careful to not listen to them too much. So here's your summary. Whatever you do it in this order. Do it better, faster, louder, be explicit about it, be focused, network your way, be smart, have resilience, be ignorant, and don't forget to sharpen the axe. So whatever you do, what I want you to do is start. There's no better time than now. And always remember, the future is a renewable resource. Every day you get a new chance to do the thing. If you screwed up today, that's okay. Go to bed, wake up tomorrow, new day. And if everything fails, first of all, trust me, you'll be fine. Like whatever you do, you'll be fine. And if everything ever fails, give me a call. That's my WhatsApp number.